They stopped at a lonely gas station on a cold autumn afternoon, just another stop on a long road. But when their shepherd, Duke, ran behind the station barking, what Tom and Lisa found would break their hearts. A hungry boy sharing his last piece of bread with a stray dog. "Why aren't you eating, son?" Lisa asked. The boy looked up, eyes full of quiet pain, and said, "Because he's hungrier than me." What happened next would change all their lives forever. If you believe kindness can still save the world, stay with us. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of faith and hope. The late autumn air of Montana carried a dry, brittle chill that scraped softly against the pine trees and whispered along the empty highway. The sun had already begun to sag behind the horizon, painting long amber lines across the asphalt, when Tom and Lisa rolled into a small roadside gas station with their German shepherd, Duke. The place looked forgotten by time. One flickering neon sign that said, "Open," a soda machine humming like it had given up long ago, and the faint smell of oil and old coffee drifting through the cold. Tom killed the engine of his Harley, the rumble dying slowly until only the sighing wind remained. He was a tall man in his late 40s, built broad like a man shaped by the road itself. Years under the sun had etched fine cracks around his eyes, and his beard, peppered gray, carried the stubborn defiance of someone who'd seen both war and loss. He wasn't a loud man. Tom spoke with the kind of weight that made others listen. A man of few words, not because he had none, but because he had learned silence often said more. There was a steadiness in him, a quiet code that every biker in his circle respected. Lisa, younger by a few years, was his counterpoint. Sharp, quick-minded, and softer in spirit. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose braid that brushed against her worn leather jacket. She had a warmth that survived through everything. Through cold miles, through dusty roads, through nights spent under leaking motel roofs. Her eyes, light green like moss after rain, held a kind of gentleness that made even strangers lower their guard. She once worked as a nurse before she chose the road, trading sterile hospital walls for the open wind. There was kindness in her, but also quiet steel. And then there was Duke, their companion of 5 years, a strong ash-gray German shepherd with a streak of white down his chest. He moved with the discipline of a trained soldier, but carried the heart of something gentler. Duke was 6 years old, big for his breed, with alert ears and amber eyes that missed nothing. He'd been rescued from an abandoned K-9 unit Tom once helped dismantle, and since then, the dog had followed him like a shadow. Protective, loyal, almost telepathically in tune with his moods. As Lisa filled the tank, Tom wiped his gloves and looked around. The place was quiet except for the distant sound of wind teasing a loose shutter. Then Duke's ears pricked up. His body stiffened. A low growl rolled through his chest, deep, focused, not fearful, but alert. Tom followed his gaze toward the alley behind the gas station. "You hear something, boy?" he murmured. Duke took off without waiting for a command. Tom sighed, exchanged a glance with Lisa, and followed. Behind the gas station, the smell of old garbage and rain-soaked cardboard hung thick in the air. The light was dim. The evening was folding in fast. And that was when they saw him, a boy crouched near a dented dumpster, his knees drawn, close to his chest. He couldn't have been more than 10, though the way he held himself, wary, still, with eyes that didn't blink easily, made him seem older. His hair was a mess of brown tangles, uneven as if it had been cut with dull scissors. The sleeves of his gray hoodie were ripped at the wrists, and dirt marked his face in tired streaks. But what caught Lisa's breath was not the bruises on his skin or the hunger in his cheeks. It was what he was doing. In his small hands, he held half a piece of bread, the other half already on the ground beside a scrappy brown stray dog. The boy whispered something to the animal and then pushed the bread closer. The stray sniffed, took it, and wagged its tail once before retreating behind the dumpster again. Lisa stepped forward softly. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, voice careful, kind. "You feeding him?" The boy startled, clutching the remaining bread to his chest. Duke stopped beside Tom, posture low but calm, head tilted slightly as if assessing whether this child was a friend or threat. The boy's eyes flicked between the tall man, the woman, and the big shepherd. I didn't steal nothin', he said quickly. His voice was hoarse, small. Tom raised his palms in a peace gesture. "No one said you did," he said quietly. His tone was level, gentle in a way that came from experience dealing with fear. "We were just passing through." Lisa crouched to his level. "What's your name, honey?" The boy hesitated. "Eli." "That's a strong name," she said. "How old are you, Eli?" He looked down, then whispered, 10. "I think." Tom frowned at that. Kids usually knew exactly how old they were. "You out here alone?" Eli shook his head slowly. "My mom's close by." Then his stomach growled, the sound sharp in the cold. Lisa noticed how his hands trembled as he clutched the bread. "When's the last time you ate?" she asked. Eli bit his lip and began to count silently on his fingers. "Sunday," he said finally. "That was 4 days ago." Lisa's heart clenched. 4 days? She repeated softly. The boy nodded, eyes darting nervously towards the stray dog, as if ashamed to have been caught doing something wrong. "It's okay," she said. "You did a good thing feeding him." Eli's voice cracked as he replied, "He looked hungrier than me." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air between them felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter it. Tom crouched down beside Lisa, resting his forearm on one knee. "You did the right thing, kid," he said. "But you shouldn't be out here by yourself. Where's your mom?" Eli pointed vaguely towards the dark outline of a van parked by the tree line, barely visible in the fading light. "She's sleeping," he said. "We're just stopping for tonight." Tom's eyes followed the direction. The van looked broken down. Flat tire, duct-taped window, engine hood, partly open like a wounded thing. He exhaled slowly. "You living in that?" Eli didn't answer, which was answer enough. Lisa offered a small smile. "You know, my husband makes the best chili you'll ever taste. You think your mom would be okay if you came and had a bite?" The boy's expression softened for a heartbeat, but suspicion lingered. "You're strangers." "You're right," Lisa said with a nod. "But Duke's not. He's got good instincts. If he likes us, maybe we're not so bad." Eli looked at the dog, who was sitting now, tail brushing the ground once, twice, in a slow rhythm. Then Duke leaned forward and sniffed the boy's hand. Eli didn't move. The dog licked his fingers once, and then looked up at him as if saying, "You're safe now." Something in that simple gesture cracked the boy's wall. He reached out tentatively and scratched behind Duke's ear. "He's warm," Eli murmured. Lisa smiled faintly. "He likes good people." For the first time, Eli's mouth twitched toward a smile, but it was fleeting, like sunlight through clouds. Tom stood and looked toward the van again. The protective instinct that once belonged to his years in the Marines flared alive. "Lisa," he murmured, "we should check on the mother." She nodded. "But let's not scare them." As they started walking, Eli stood uncertainly, watching. "You're not going to call the police, right?" he asked suddenly, panic sharpening his voice. Tom turned back, his eyes soft but firm. "No, kid. Not unless someone's hurt." Eli's shoulders sagged with visible relief. He followed them hesitantly, Duke walking beside him like a silent guardian. As they rounded the corner of the station, the wind picked up, rattling a tin sign overhead. The last of the sunlight broke into thin gold shards across the lot. Tom felt that old heaviness again, the one that came whenever he found something broken that didn't deserve to be. He'd seen men die in deserts far from home, seen mothers waiting for folded flags, and he thought he'd grown numb to suffering. But the sight of that boy, half-starved and still feeding a stray dog, cut through all his armor like nothing else. Beside him, Lisa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She reached for his hand as they approached the van. "She's just a kid trying to survive," she whispered. Tom nodded, tightening his grip slightly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But maybe tonight we can make that a little easier." Duke padded ahead, nose to the ground, tail low but steady, leading them toward the van where, under the shadow of dying light, a story neither of them expected was waiting to unfold. The night had thickened into a heavy silence by the time Tom, Lisa, and Duke reached the edge of the gas station lot where the old van sat beneath a leaning pine tree. The air smelled faintly of rust and wet leaves. The van itself was an aging Ford, its white paint blistered with rust, one headlight cracked, and the right rear tire sagging against the ground. Its back windows were covered with layers of cardboard and duct tape. From a distance, it looked abandoned, but as they approached, Tom noticed a faint flicker of light through the gap in the curtain, the weak, trembling glow of a candle, or perhaps a dying flashlight. Eli hesitated beside the dog, glancing nervously at his mother's shelter as though fearing the light itself might disappear if he drew too close. Tom crouched to meet his eyes again. "She's in there?" Eli nodded. "She doesn't like talking to strangers," the boy murmured. "She gets scared easy." Lisa's voice softened. "Then we'll talk quiet." Tom stepped forward and rapped his knuckles lightly on the side door. A pause followed, then a faint rustle from inside. When the door opened, the smell of damp blankets and cold air spilled out. A woman sat in the front seat, her back hunched slightly, one hand still holding a pen over a weathered notebook. Her name, as Tom would soon learn, was Sarah Williams, early 30s, pale-skinned but sunburned around the nose, with dark brown hair pulled into a messy knot. She had the kind of beauty that sorrow never fully erased, though it had certainly tried. Her eyes, a soft hazel, carried exhaustion deeper than sleepless nights, the exhaustion of a woman who had been brave for too long. She blinked against the light from Tom's flashlight, instinctively shielding Eli behind her until she recognized his small frame beside the stranger's. "Eli, you're supposed to stay close." Her voice trembled, not from anger, but from fear worn thin. "It's okay, Mom," the boy said quickly. "They helped me. They have a dog." Her gaze drifted down to Duke, whose large frame filled the space between them. The shepherd stood steady, tail still, eyes calm but watchful. Something in his quiet strength made Sarah exhale, as though the presence of an animal that noble meant she could trust its owners. Lisa spoke first, her tone gentle. "We didn't mean to scare you. Your boy was sharing his food with a stray dog out back. We just wanted to make sure you both were all right." Sarah nodded hesitantly, lowering her pen and closing the notebook on her lap. The cover was cracked and faded, a soldier's insignia faintly embossed on the corner. "We're fine," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "We're just passing through." Tom noticed the weariness in her face, the hollow cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes that looked older than her years. "Mind if I ask how long you've been on the road?" "Too long," she admitted after a pause. "A few months since we lost the house." She looked away as she spoke, her thumb rubbing against the edge of the notebook as if it held her last bit of stability. Lisa exchanged a look with Tom, a silent conversation. Then she took a step closer to the open door. "You mean you were renting?" Sarah hesitated. "No, it was supposed to be ours. Government housing for families who lost someone in service." Her voice cracked slightly. "My husband, Sergeant David Williams, was killed in Afghanistan. They said the papers were wrong, that the ownership wasn't confirmed. They said I'd have to reapply." Tom felt a cold anger stir in his gut. He had served, too. Different war, same bureaucratic cruelty. He'd seen how widows got tangled in red tape while people who'd never set foot near danger collected paychecks for it. "They took it from you?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded, her fingers tightening around the notebook. "One day they just changed the locks. I begged them to give me time, but they said the property wasn't legally mine. Everything inside, David's medals, his flag, even his guitar, gone." Her voice fell to a whisper. "I tried to fight it, but—" Eli spoke softly, as if finishing the sentence she couldn't. "She got sick, and then we ran out of money." The confession hit the air like a bruise. Tom's jaw tightened. Lisa's eyes flicked toward the inside of the van. A single sleeping bag, a plastic cooler, a few crumpled grocery bags. On the dashboard sat a small photo in a cracked frame, a man in desert fatigues smiling with an arm around Sarah, a toddler version of Eli perched on his shoulder. Lisa asked gently, "That's him?" Sarah followed her gaze. "Yeah, David. He was a medic with the 101st. She smiled faintly, but it was the kind of smile that hurts to wear. "He used to say that kindness was a form of armor, that even on the battlefield you should carry a piece of gentleness with you." Tom's throat felt tight. "Sounds like a good man." "He was," she whispered. "He never came home in one piece, though." Outside, the wind moved through the pine branches, whispering like distant ocean waves. Duke sniffed the air, then walked to the van and sat beside the open door, as if taking up guard duty without command. The simple act seemed to comfort Sarah, a living presence between her fear and the world beyond it. Lisa reached into her saddlebag and pulled out 2 thermoses. "You both should eat something warm." She poured steaming soup into a tin cup and handed it to Sarah, who blinked at it as though unsure whether to accept. "It's okay," Lisa said softly. "We made too much tonight." Sarah accepted it, hands trembling slightly. The smell of tomato and basil filled the air, faint but homely. "Thank you," she murmured. "We haven't had a hot meal in—" She trailed off, glancing at her son. "Too long." Eli looked up at Lisa and asked, "Are you really bikers? Like the kind that ride in big groups?" Tom chuckled, his voice rumbling like gravel. "Used to be. These days we just ride for the road, not for the noise." The boy grinned faintly. "You don't look mean." Lisa laughed softly. "That's because I let him do all the scowling." Even Sarah smiled at that, small, tired, but genuine. For a brief moment, the van felt less like a cage and more like a home again. Tom leaned against the doorframe, studying the woman in front of him. There was something in the way she carried herself. Weary, but unbroken. It reminded him of soldiers who'd lost everything but refused to let the world take their dignity too. He respected that. When Sarah finally set the empty cup down, she looked up at him. "Thank you for stopping," she said. "Most people just drive by." Tom shrugged. "Maybe most people don't have a dog with better instincts than they do." Sarah smiled faintly. "He's beautiful. What's his name?" "Duke." "He reminds me of David's old unit dog," she said softly. Big, serious, always watching. They said he could sense when something bad was coming. Tom met her eyes. Sometimes they still can. The words lingered. A few moments of quiet passed before Lisa asked, "Do you have somewhere to go tomorrow?" Sarah shook her head. "We were heading toward Bozeman. I heard there's work there. Cleaning or kitchens. Doesn't matter which." Tom glanced toward the dark road stretching north. He'd been to Bozeman. He knew it wasn't a place kind to people with nowhere to start. He thought of the boy feeding a stray with his last crust of bread. Then he looked at Sarah, clutching her notebook as though it held her husband's ghost. Something in him hardened into resolve. "Well," he said finally, straightening up, "Bozeman's a long way. Maybe we can help you figure something out before you go that far." Sarah hesitated. "You've done enough already." Lisa smiled kindly. "Not yet." The candle inside the van flickered lower, but the light from Tom's bike cut through the dark, steady and warm. Duke lay down beside the door, tail thumping once before settling. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone meant it when they said they wanted to help. And in that quiet, uncertain hope, the night deepened around them, holding its breath for what would come next. The night in Montana settled like an old coat over the quiet valley. The sky was a wash of deep indigo, the kind of darkness that carried every sound with clarity, the faint hum of insects, the creak of cooling engines, and the distant cry of an owl. Tom sat outside the van, elbows on his knees, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, though he never smoked more than a few drags. The cold air sharpened the smoke into ribbons that drifted toward the trees. Beside him, Duke lay curled in the gravel, head resting on his paws, amber eyes open, watching every shadow like a sentry. Tom hadn't slept. He rarely did when something didn't sit right. Years in the Marines had carved that habit deep into him, the instinct to stay awake when the world turned too quiet. His mind kept circling back to one name, one memory that refused to stay buried. Frank Dalton. He remembered the man vividly. Tall, soft in the shoulders, but always dressed like he was attending his own promotion. Frank had been the logistics officer in Tom's old unit, the kind of man who could talk circles around regulations, a smooth voice that could sell broken engines as temporarily non-operational assets. Tom never liked him. Too much charm, not enough spine. There had been rumors, missing supplies, misplaced funds, but back then, the war blurred everything, and no one had the energy to chase ghosts through paperwork. Tom rubbed his face with a calloused hand, the stubble along his jaw rasping under his palm. "Still the same rat," he muttered. Duke's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Behind him, the van creaked softly. Lisa stepped out, wrapping her worn leather jacket tighter around her shoulders. Her hair was loose now, catching the silver of the moonlight. She didn't ask if he was awake, she knew. She crouched beside him, eyes tracing the cigarette between his fingers. "That bad?" Tom exhaled smoke, watching it vanish. "Worse." She waited. "He's the same guy," Tom said finally. "Frank Dalton. We served in the same logistics unit overseas. He handled the supply budgets. I always knew he was dirty. Cooked the books, moved money around. But there was never proof. He got discharged before anyone could pin him." Lisa frowned, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "And now he's running a veterans housing fund?" Tom nodded, grim. "And stealing from the people it's supposed to help." He took out his phone, cracked screen, scuffed case, and scrolled to a name buried deep in his contacts. "Walt Keegan." Lisa tilted her head. "That the same Walt who used to fix comms in Kandahar?" "Yeah," Tom said. "He's with the Federal Veterans Office now. paper pusher type, but he still owes me a few favors. He hit call. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. You picking bad hours again, Hollis? Tom cracked a small smile. You still sound like you gargle. Gravel, Walt. Old habits. What's this about? Tom's tone shifted, low and deliberate. I need you to check a name. Frank Dalton. Says he's managing property assistance for Gold Star families in the state housing program. There was a pause, the sound of keys clacking faintly in the background. Yeah, I know the name. Couple of reports floating around him already. Why do you ask? Tom glanced toward the van, where he could see the silhouette of Sarah sleeping in the front seat, Eli curled up beside her under a threadbare blanket. Because I've got a widow and her kids sleeping in a busted van, and their house, the one her husband died for, is under his name. Walt's voice hardened. Jesus, that son of a... Give me 5 minutes. The call went quiet except for the sound of Tom's steady breathing and the faint tapping from the other end. When Walt came back, his tone was clipped, all professionalism now. You were right. The house was reassigned to a private trustee account, Dalton's. The transfer happened 2 months after Sergeant David Williams's death benefit cleared. There's forged signatures on the reassessment papers. Classic paper switch. Lisa covered her mouth. He took the house. Tom's eyes darkened. And rented it out, didn't he? Yeah. Property's listed as leased to secondary occupants. He's pocketing the full payment. There's enough here to bury him if we push it through the right channels. Tom was silent for a long moment. Send me everything you can without getting yourself fired. Already on it, Walt said. Then, more quietly, You're doing good work, Tom. I know how much this stuff eats you. Yeah, Tom said softly, ending the call. He stared into the darkness, the ember of his cigarette flaring red. Lisa watched him. You're not just doing this for them, are you? Tom hesitated, jaw flexing. Back in 2009, there was a convoy ambush near Jalalabad. We lost 2 trucks. Supplies went missing before the attack. Food, ammo, medical kits. Frank signed the manifests. I never forgot his signature. Men died because they didn't have what they needed. His voice dropped to a whisper. And I let him walk? Lisa reached over and took his hand. Then maybe this is your second chance to make it right. Tom nodded, slow and deliberate. Yeah, maybe it is. He looked toward the van again, to the quiet rise and fall of 2 sleeping figures who had already lost too much. He made a silent promise that by dawn, he'd have proof solid enough to take Dalton down. By morning, the first light filtered through the thin fog hanging over the road. Sarah stirred awake, her hair tangled against the window glass. Lisa had brewed coffee on the small camp stove beside the bikes, its smell filling the cool air. She handed Sarah a cup and smiled. You look like someone who could use this. Sarah accepted it, gratefully, though her hands trembled slightly from the cold. You were both up early, she said. Couldn't sleep, Tom replied simply. Eli blinked sleepily beside his mother, hair sticking up in tufts. Where are we going today? Lisa smiled at him. Nowhere yet. Gotta make sure your mom gets her home back first. Sarah frowned, confused. What do you mean? Tom crouched near her, the lines of fatigue still etched into his face, but his eyes held purpose now. You said the man who took your house was named Frank Dalton. Yes, she said. He told me there was an error in the papers. He seemed so official. He even had government badges. Tom's jaw tightened. They were fake. He forged your transfer documents. I confirmed it last night. Sarah blinked in disbelief. You... what? How? Tom shrugged, modestly. Old friends in the right places. For a moment, her face shifted from shock to grief to a flicker of relief, like someone surfacing after being underwater too long. "So it wasn't my fault," she whispered. "No," Lisa said softly. "It never was." Duke walked over and rested his head on Sarah's knee, sensing her trembling. She reached down to stroke his fur, her voice breaking. "I thought I'd failed David. I thought I lost everything he gave us." Tom looked away, his throat thick. "You didn't fail him, someone else did." Eli's small hand found his mother's. "Mom, we can go home?" Sarah looked at Tom, uncertain but hopeful. "Not yet," he said, "but soon. First, we're going to make sure that the man who took it never does this to anyone again." The boy nodded solemnly, as if accepting a mission. Lisa poured another cup of coffee and handed it to Tom. "So what's the plan, soldier?" Tom's lips curled into something between a smile and a grim line. "We start with a visit." Duke's ears perked at the word, tail thumping once against the dirt. The morning sun stretched across the empty road, and for the first time since they'd stopped at that gas station, Tom felt the weight in his chest lift, not because the battle was over, but because it had finally begun. The sky that afternoon had turned the color of tarnished silver. Clouds pressed low and heavy, pregnant with rain, the kind that didn't simply fall, but punished the earth. Tom felt the shift in the air before it came, the same instinct that once told him a sandstorm was coming in the desert. He watched Sarah disappear through the glass doors of the County Veterans Affairs office, her shoulders hunched beneath a borrowed raincoat, clutching the folder of documents that Lisa had helped her organize. The building itself looked exhausted, a squat brick structure with faded flags and a roof patched so many times it looked like a quilt of government neglect. Lisa sat in the passenger seat of the truck, flipping through her notepad. "She's brave to face them alone," she said softly. Tom's jaw tightened. "She shouldn't have to." He leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning the parking lot. There were two cars parked across the street, a rust-colored sedan and a dark pickup. The sedan was empty. The pickup wasn't. A man sat behind the wheel, smoking. The faint orange tip of his cigarette flared, dimmed, flared again. Tom didn't like it. "Stay here," he muttered. He stepped out into the wind just as Sarah exited the office, her face pale. "They said the records are sealed," she whispered. "They won't even let me see the property file without proof of ownership, which I can't have because it's the very thing I'm asking for." Tom put a hand on her shoulder. "That's not the end, just a wall, and walls can be broken." He walked her to the truck, but before they climbed in, he caught sight of the pickup again. The man inside was pretending to read a newspaper, though it was upside down. Tom noted the heavy jaw, the close-shaved head, the faint tattoo of a snake curling up the man's wrist. He filed the details away. Old habits never died. By the time they reached the gas station where the van was parked, the wind had picked up. Trees thrashed against the gray horizon, and the smell of ozone thickened. Sarah sat quietly, staring out at the rain beginning to speckle the glass. "He was there," she said suddenly. Tom glanced at her. "Who?" "Frank. In the lobby. He smiled when he saw me. He said, 'Still chasing ghosts, Mrs. Williams?'" Lisa clenched her jaw. "That man's got no soul." "He told me to drop it," Sarah whispered. "Said it wasn't worth making trouble for myself." Tom didn't answer. He just looked out the windshield as the first streak of lightning split the sky. That night, the storm came in full. Wind howled through the trees like sirens, and the rain hit the metal roof of the gas station awning in relentless sheets. The van shook occasionally under the force of it. Inside, Eli was asleep in the back seat, wrapped in Duke's flank for warmth. The dog's breathing was steady, But every few minutes, his ears twitched, reacting to something only he could hear. Tom stood outside, coat pulled tight, rain dripping from his hair. The storm had always calmed him. It drowned out the noise of thought. But tonight, there was something else in the air, something sharp and wrong. He felt it in his spine before he heard it. A car door slammed in the distance. Headlights flared briefly before cutting out. Then came footsteps, 3 sets, crunching through gravel. Lisa emerged from the truck, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. "You feel that too?" Tom nodded. "Stay close." The footsteps drew nearer, muffled voices cutting through the rain. "She's in there," one said, a low, mean voice, southern drawl thick with whiskey. Then came the pounding. "Open up!" A fist hit the van's side door so hard the metal rattled. "You got 5 minutes to pack your junk and leave before morning, you understand?" Sarah startled awake, grabbing Eli. The boy clutched her, wide-eyed. Duke was on his feet in an instant, fur bristling, a deep growl vibrating through the van. Tom stepped forward into the downpour. Lightning illuminated the scene for a heartbeat. Frank Dalton, soaked trench coat clinging to his heavy frame, hair plastered to his scalp. 2 men stood beside him, one tall and thin with a crooked nose, the other burly with a neck like a tree trunk. Both wore denim jackets darkened by rain, and both reeked of trouble. Frank's smirk cut through the storm. "Evening, Hollis. Didn't expect to find you here playing savior?" Tom's face was expressionless. "Get away from the van." Frank laughed, the sound swallowed by thunder. "Relax. I'm just having a conversation with an old tenant of mine. You know, the one squatting on government property." Lisa stepped beside Tom, phone held discreetly against her leg, the red recording light barely visible in the rain. "You might want to choose your words carefully, Frank," she said, her tone cool. Frank turned his head toward her, eyes narrowing. "You recording me, sweetheart?" "Of course not," Lisa lied, sweetly. Frank took a step forward, and Duke lunged, barking once, a low, guttural sound that made the smaller of the 2 men flinch back. Tom didn't move, didn't blink. "You've got exactly 10 seconds to walk away." Frank's smirk faltered just a fraction. "You think you scare me, biker? You think anyone's going to take the word of a washed-up vet over mine?" Lightning flashed again, framing his face in the white glare of the storm. In that instant, Tom saw everything: greed, cowardice, the hollow arrogance of a man who thought the system would always protect him. "I don't need anyone to take my word," Tom said softly. "I just need you to keep talking." Frank hesitated, then snarled, stepping closer. "She signed those papers willingly. That house was worthless. You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Lisa's finger brushed the side of her phone, ensuring every word was captured. "I belong wherever men like you profit from the dead," Tom replied. Frank's eyes flashed. He lifted a hand, pointing at Sarah through the rain-smeared window. "She's a parasite, living off pity. I'm cleaning up the mess." That did it. Duke barked, deep and thunderous. Tom took one deliberate step forward. "If you ever come near her or that boy again, I'll make sure you regret it. You understand?" Frank's grin twisted. "You threatening me?" "No," Tom said quietly. "I'm promising you." For a long moment they stood facing each other, the rain falling in cold curtains between them, the night alive with tension. Then Frank spat at the ground. "You'll regret this." He turned, shoving his men toward the car. The tires spun on wet gravel as they peeled out, headlights vanishing into the darkness. Lisa let out a shaky breath. "Got all of it," she said, holding up her phone. Tom nodded once, still staring after the retreating taillights. "Good. That's step 1. Inside the van, Sarah was trembling, clutching Eli close. When Tom opened the door, she looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "He's not going to stop." Tom's voice was steady. "He will, because next time he won't be knocking. He'll be answering." Duke climbed into the van beside Eli, pressing his warm body against the boy. The storm began to ease, rain softening into drizzle, thunder rolling away into distant hills. Tom looked up at the clouds breaking apart, streaks of moonlight peeking through. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time since meeting Sarah and Eli, he felt something like purpose again, a clear target in a world that had blurred too much. The morning after the storm, the world seemed scrubbed raw and new. Rainwater pooled in the potholes along the cracked asphalt, reflecting the pale Montana sky like broken mirrors. The air smelled of wet pine and gasoline, the remnants of last night's chaos still clinging to the ground. Tom stood outside the gas station, tightening the strap of his worn leather gloves, his breath misting in the cold. Duke prowled beside him, tail low, eyes sharp, every sense tuned to the unease that still lingered in the air. Inside the van, Sarah tried to brush Eli's hair with her fingers, though the comb she'd found in her bag kept catching on tangles. "You're shaking," Eli said softly. "It's just cold," she lied. Her face was pale, shadows pooled beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept, every sound through the night pulling her awake, expecting another knock at the door. Lisa approached, holding 2 paper cups of coffee that steamed in the early light. "You need to drink something warm," she said, handing one to Sarah. "We'll figure this out." Sarah took it with both hands. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Men like him never stop until someone makes them." Tom stepped up beside them. "That's exactly what we're going to do." His voice was low, steady, the same tone he used to give orders years ago, the kind that meant plans, not promises. The sound of a car engine echoed in the distance. Lisa glanced toward the road, her instincts sharp. A black SUV turned the corner and slowed to a stop in front of them. The driver's door opened, and Frank Dalton stepped out, dry-cleaned suit immaculate despite the muddy road, hair slicked back, the smug confidence of a man who believed the world still belonged to him. Beside him, a local police officer climbed out, late 40s, paunch under his belt, face like weathered leather from too many years of small-town power. His badge gleamed, though his eyes were dull, used to looking the other way. His nameplate read Officer Ray Murdoch. "Morning," Frank called, his tone too casual. "Hope you packed your things, sweetheart," he said toward Sarah. "The county's decided you're trespassing. Got a signed order and everything." He slapped a folder against his palm, grinning. Tom's jaw flexed. "You got that from the same printer you used for her housing documents?" Murdoch's lips tightened. "Watch it, son. You're not in charge here." "Neither are you," Tom said calmly, stepping closer. "Not for long." Lisa had already moved behind them, thumbing her phone screen, sending a message to Walt, the contact Tom trusted more than any lawman in this county. She attached the voice recording from the night before, Frank's every word clear as glass. The file whooshed off into the ether with a soft chime. Frank noticed her movement. "You know, recording without consent's a felony in some states," he sneered. Lisa smiled faintly. "So is fraud, Frank." For the first time, the man's smirk flickered. He turned to Murdoch. "Do your job." The officer sighed and stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you and the kid to come with me. The property's under private claim." Sarah's voice trembled. "Private claim? That's my husband's house. It was given to me when he—" Frank interrupted sharply. "When he died. Tragic, really. But the paperwork says otherwise now. You can check it if you want, though I doubt you'll understand the legal parts." That was when Tom's composure cracked, just enough for the old soldier to surface. He stepped forward, rainwater splashing under his boots. "She doesn't need to understand the law," he said. "She just needs someone to make it work the way it was meant to." Frank scoffed. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Hit me?" Tom's silence was answer enough. Before Frank could blink, Duke moved first. One sharp bark, then a low growl, teeth bared just enough to send both Frank and Murdoch stepping back instinctively. The air felt charged, a coil waiting to snap. Lisa's phone buzzed once, a message from Walt. "Forwarded to federal contact. Agents en route. Stay put." She looked up, rain beginning to fall again in thin needles. "Tom," she said quietly. "It's done." Frank noticed the glance, saw the faint shift of her hand, and realization dawned in his eyes. His mask broke. "You think you can ruin me with some stupid recording? I own this damn county!" He lunged toward her, fury snapping his voice into something animal. But Duke was faster. The shepherd sprang forward, slamming Frank back into the mud, teeth clamped on his sleeve but not breaking skin, controlled, precise, trained. Frank yelled, scrambling, trying to push the dog off, but Duke didn't move. Tom was beside them in 2 strides, his voice calm but commanding. "Off, Duke." The dog released instantly, stepping back, fur bristling, eyes still locked on Frank. Lisa didn't flinch. She raised her phone, camera still rolling. "Got that too," she said. Murdoch froze, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. "This has gone far enough," he muttered, voice shaking slightly. Tom turned on him. "You know what's coming, don't you, Ray? You've been helping this bastard cover his tracks for years, but this time there's federal eyes watching. You still want to be standing next to him when they get here?" The officer swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. "You're bluffing." The sound of sirens answered for him. 3 black SUVs appeared at the far end of the road, their lights cutting through the mist. They pulled to a stop, doors opening in unison. From the first car stepped a woman in a long navy trench coat, badge gleaming on her belt. She was tall, in her late 30s, with short-cropped hair the color of sand and a gaze that could slice through lies. Her name was Agent Marla Jensen, and she carried the air of someone used to walking into storms and calming them by sheer authority. "Frank Dalton," she called, "Federal Veterans Affairs Enforcement Division. You're under arrest for fraud, falsification of government records, and unlawful possession of federal property." Frank froze, mouth opening, but no words coming out. Jensen motioned to her team. 2 agents moved forward, handcuffs flashing silver as they turned him around. Mud splashed against his suit as they read him his rights. Lisa exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging as the tension drained. Tom just watched, expression unreadable, as the man who had stolen so much was finally forced to stand in the rain like the rest of them. Murdoch stepped back, hands raised. "I didn't know," he stammered. Agent Jensen's sharp eyes pinned him. "You signed off on falsified eviction paperwork. You knew enough." He went pale as one of the agents moved toward him. Sarah stood in the doorway of the van, Eli clinging to her waist. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "Is it over?" Tom looked at her, then at the flashing lights reflecting in Duke's eyes. "For him, yes," he said quietly. "For you and Eli, it's just beginning." Agent Jensen approached, glancing at Tom. "We'll need your statements, Mr. Hollis, and the recording." Lisa handed her the phone. "Every second's there." Jensen nodded. "Good work. We've been tracking Dalton for months but couldn't get direct proof. You just gave us what we needed." Tom gave a small nod. "Just doing what should have been done a long time ago." The rain eased as the agents drove away with their prisoners. Sarah watched until the lights disappeared down the road, her tears mixing with the drizzle. Eli looked up at Tom. "You stopped the bad guys," he said simply. Tom crouched, meeting his gaze. "No, kid. You did. When you told the truth." Duke barked once, as if agreeing, and nudged Eli's hand. The boy giggled softly for the first time in days. As the clouds began to part, sunlight broke through in thin golden shards. Tom stood there, soaked to the... 3 days later, Montana woke under a pale blue sky brushed with clouds like thin trails of smoke. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and still, the kind of stillness that came only after something violent. Sarah stood in front of the post office in a plain gray coat borrowed from Lisa. Her hair, now washed and brushed, gleamed in the soft sunlight. In her hands was a sealed envelope stamped with the insignia of the Federal Veterans Affairs Office. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in the formal language of apology, recognition of administrative error, and a restoration of her full property rights. But beneath the cold words, she read something warmer. A return to dignity. When she looked up, Tom and Lisa were waiting by the bikes, the engines off, helmets resting on the seats. Tom's weathered face softened just enough to reveal something like pride. "What's it say?" he asked. Sarah exhaled slowly, her eyes wet. "They're giving it back. The house." Lisa grinned and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Then let's go home." The drive took them west, through stretches of open road, where fields of golden grass bowed under the wind and the distant mountains cut sharp lines into the horizon. The small house appeared after nearly 2 hours, sitting alone at the edge of town, its white paint now dull and flaking, its fence half collapsed under years of neglect. The mailbox still bore the name Williams in faded blue letters. Sarah stopped in front of it, stepping off the bike. For a long moment she just stared, hands trembling, lips parted but no words coming. She remembered the day she and David first stood here, 2 young dreamers with a baby in her arms and laughter in their voices. Now she stood in the same place, her son taller, her laughter replaced by quiet disbelief. Tom and Lisa began unloading supplies from their saddlebags, paint cans, brushes, a set of tools Tom had picked up in town. Duke jumped down from the back of the truck, sniffing the air, tail wagging cautiously. Eli ran after him, the boy's joy breaking through the somber mood. Lisa took Sarah's hand. "We'll make it look new again," she said softly. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood. The furniture was gone, the curtains torn. A cracked photograph frame lay on the floor, a picture of David in uniform, smiling beneath the desert sun. Sarah knelt to pick it up, her fingers tracing the line of his face. "He would have fixed this place in a week," she whispered. Tom knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Then we'll do it in 2." They worked through the afternoon. Lisa painted the door a bright navy blue, her sleeves rolled up to the elbows. Sarah scrubbed the kitchen counters, her movements growing steadier with each sweep. Eli and Duke carried small branches and rocks out of the yard as though they were building something far greater than a home, something whole again. Tom climbed onto the roof, patching holes, hammering nails with the deliberate rhythm of a man who found peace in work. The scars on his forearms caught the sunlight, faint reminders of his past life. He had spent years fixing engines, bridges, and broken men. But this, he realized, was different. He wasn't fixing something to move on. He was fixing something so others could stay. As evening fell, the house began to look less like a ruin and more like a promise. The windows gleamed, the porch was swept clean, and the old flagpole in the yard stood upright once more. Sarah watched as Lisa hung a fresh curtain in the living room, its fabric pale yellow, catching the last light of day. Then Tom appeared from the shed carrying a small wooden board. "Found this in the garage," he said. "It's still solid." He placed it on the porch railing, then handed Eli a small carving knife. "Think you can help me with the letters?" Eli's eyes lit up. "What should it say?" Tom smiled. "Whatever feels right." The boy thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Dad's name." Lisa nodded. "And maybe a little something more." Together they carved the words into the wood, the sound of the knife scraping steady and sure. By the time they finished, the sun had slipped low behind the hills, turning the sky into a wash of gold and rose. Sarah held the board in her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The sign read, "Home of Sergeant David's family, protected by friends who ride." Tom helped Eli hang it beside the door. The boy hammered the last nail with both hands, Duke watching from the steps, tail sweeping across the porch. When it was done, they stepped back. The house no longer looked empty. It looked lived in, alive. Lisa leaned against Tom's shoulder, her voice soft. "You think he'd be proud?" Tom looked toward Sarah and Eli, who stood together beneath the sign, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. "He already is," he said. Inside, Sarah lit a small candle on the windowsill, a simple flame against the darkening world. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She was home. Later, when Eli had fallen asleep on the old couch and Duke lay curled at his feet, Sarah stepped outside. The night was clear, the air crisp. She found Tom sitting on the porch steps, a mug of coffee in hand. He didn't turn as she sat beside him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You already did," he replied. "You kept going." For a while, they just sat in silence. The crickets began their slow chorus. The wind moved through the trees. The wooden sign above them creaked softly, a heartbeat in the quiet. Lisa came out and joined them, handing Sarah a folded piece of paper. "From Agent Jensen," she said. "It's a contact for housing assistance and counseling. And a job listing. They're hiring at the VA office in Bozeman, administrative work. They said your name came recommended." Sarah blinked, surprised. "By who?" Lisa smiled. "Let's just say someone who's good at writing letters." Tom grunted softly. "She means me." Sarah laughed, a sound light and real. "You're impossible." "Yeah," Tom said, "but effective." She looked back at the glowing windows of her home, where her son slept safe for the first time in months. Then she whispered, "Thank you for giving me my life back." Tom shook his head. "You gave it back to yourself. We just handed you the key." The moon rose higher, washing the house in silver light. On the porch railing, the sign gleamed faintly, the carved letters catching every glint of starlight. The morning sun rose gently over the Montana foothills, scattering its gold across a sky washed clean by autumn rain. The day carried that peculiar stillness that only comes on Veterans Day, a reverent hush, as though even the wind knew when to lower its voice. The small town of Silver Creek was alive with quiet motion. Flags lined the streets, their edges snapping softly. The people gathered in the town square, bundled in coats and scarves, holding photographs, medals, and folded pieces of memory. Sarah stood among them, her posture straight, but her heart heavy with gratitude and ache. She wore a dark navy dress and a wool coat Lisa had lent her, the kind that fit a woman who'd spent too long carrying the cold on her back. Beside her, Eli clutched the American flag that had once draped his father's coffin, his small hands gripping the wooden pole so tightly his knuckles were white. His brown hair caught the morning light, and for the first time, he looked older than his 10 years. Tom and Lisa stood a few feet away, near their motorcycles parked along the curb. Tom had shaved that morning, a rare event, and his usually disheveled beard was trimmed to the sharp outline of a man who still respected ceremony. His leather jacket bore a single patch over the heart. Semper Fi. The creases around his eyes were deeper today, not from age, but from reflection. Lisa wore her hair tied in a loose bun under her black bandana, her expression softened by something almost maternal. She glanced at Duke, who sat beside her with perfect composure, his silver-gray fur gleaming like brushed steel. The German shepherd wore a small bandana, too, red with faded stars, a gift Eli had tied around his neck the night before. The crowd quieted as the mayor, an older man with a limp from a forgotten war, took the microphone. His name was Henry Cole, tall but slightly stooped, with a thin gray mustache and hands that trembled as he spoke. He had once been a Marine like Tom, though time had softened the command in his voice. "We gather today," he began, "not just to honor the fallen, but to remember what they fought for, the things we still build with our own hands, mercy, duty, and the courage to begin again." As he spoke, a light breeze stirred through the crowd, carrying the faint smell of pine and rain-damp earth. Sarah looked down at the folded letter in her coat pocket, the one Tom had written to the Veterans Office on her behalf weeks ago. It had helped her find a new purpose. Tomorrow she would start her first day at the VA's local outreach center, helping other widows navigate the maze she had once been lost in. Eli tugged on her hand. "Can I hold it up now?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight. Together they stepped forward to the memorial platform, where a line of families stood with their flags. When Eli lifted his father's flag, the cloth caught the light, flaring brilliant red and blue against the morning sun. The crowd fell silent. The boy's voice trembled slightly as he said the words he had practiced all week. "For my dad, Sergeant David Williams, thank you for teaching me to be brave." Tom swallowed hard. For a fleeting second, it was as if the ghost of Sergeant Williams himself stood behind the boy, tall, proud, and smiling. He had never met the man, yet somehow felt his presence threaded through every heartbeat of this day. After the ceremony, the crowd began to disperse. Children laughed, vendors opened stalls for coffee and pie, but the four of them lingered near the memorial garden where the names of local veterans were carved into black stone. The autumn light shimmered across the engraved letters like ripples on water. Lisa turned to Sarah. "He'd be proud of you, of both of you." Sarah smiled faintly. "I think he would have liked you too. He had a soft spot for rebels with good hearts." Tom chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Rebels, sure. Hearts. Jury's still out on mine." Lisa nudged him gently. "Don't listen to him. He's done more good than most people ever will." Sarah's eyes softened. "You both gave us our life back. I'll never forget that." Tom looked away, uncomfortable under gratitude. "Just doing what a Marine's supposed to do. Leave no one behind." From the pocket of her jacket, Lisa drew out a strip of worn brown leather, the one she'd kept wrapped around the handle of her Harley for years. Its surface was etched with faint, careful lettering. "David." She held it out to Sarah. "This belonged to your husband," Lisa said quietly. "He wasn't just a name on a list to us. We served in the same rescue operation years ago in Kandahar. He saved 3 medics when a supply truck overturned during a storm. One of them was me." Sarah's lips parted, eyes glistening. You knew him?" Lisa nodded. "I promised I'd pay it forward if I ever got the chance. I guess it just took me a while to find how." She pressed the leather strap into Sarah's hands. "Now it belongs back with his family." Sarah's fingers closed around it, trembling. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Tom watched silently, his jaw tight. He wasn't a man of tears, but he felt something swell deep in his chest, that rare mixture of sorrow and peace that only comes when a circle finally closes. Eli ran toward Duke, kneeling beside the dog and whispering something into his ear. The shepherd gave a soft bark, tail thumping once before licking the boy's cheek. "He said thank you too," Eli said earnestly. Tom crouched beside them. "You taking care of your mom?" Eli nodded solemnly. "Always." "Good man," Tom said. He reached out, ruffling the boy's hair, then straightened. The sun was beginning to dip lower, painting the horizon in amber fire. It was time to go. Lisa fastened her helmet, her braid slipping over her shoulder. "Ready?" Tom looked back at Sarah and Eli one last time. They stood in front of their home, the flag waving gently above the porch, the wooden sign beneath it gleaming in the dying light. Home of Sergeant David's family, protected by friends who ride. Before mounting his bike, Lisa unwrapped her spare bandana, a faded brown one embroidered with a single white dove, and tied it gently around Duke's neck. "For the road," she said. The dog wagged his tail as if understanding. As the engines roared to life, Sarah stepped forward, calling over the sound. "Where will you go now?" Tom smiled faintly. "Wherever someone needs a little help and doesn't know who to ask." Eli raised his hand, waving. "You'll come back, right?" Lisa winked. "Count on it." The two bikes pulled onto the open road, sunlight glinting off chrome and leather. Dust rose behind them like gold smoke. Duke, perched on the back of Tom's Harley with his goggles on, a sight that always made strangers smile, turned his head once, ears twitching, to look back. Behind them, Sarah and Eli stood in the yard, waving beneath the flag that fluttered against the evening wind. The sun caught it one last time before dipping below the horizon. And as the road stretched ahead, the carved words on the sign glowed faintly in the dusk. "Kindness is the only road worth riding." In the end, this story isn't just about a veteran's family, a loyal dog, or two bikers who refused to look away. It's about the quiet miracles that still live among us. Sometimes, God's grace doesn't arrive with thunder or light. It comes through human hands, through kindness, through the courage to stand up when others fall silent. The world is still full of such miracles if we keep our hearts open to see them. May this story remind us that faith is not only found in churches, but also in the everyday roads we ride, in every act of compassion we choose. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope still exists. Leave a comment to tell us what kindness means to you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate God's light in ordinary lives. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching, wherever your road leads today.